I'm sorry?
That is a yes or no question. Will you answer?
I want to hear the question. I'll answer. I'll definitely answer.
Okay, good.
I'll definitely answer.
It's pretty simple. You and I have talked before about this subject, and that is protecting the data of the Social Security Administration. When we first spoke and we had the hearing here, you said you'd do a complete review of the extent to which what I call the doggy boys had...
Welcome back to Freedom Forge. If you believe in common sense, accountability, and defending the values that made America strong, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because the mainstream media is not going to tell you what's really happening in Washington. Today, we're reacting to another heated Senate hearing involving the IRS, Social Security data security, AI technology, tax enforcement, and government transparency. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse pressed IRS leadership and administration officials over allegations involving Social Security data access, possible data leaks, and concerns about how artificial intelligence is being used inside the federal government. The hearing also focused on whether wealthy Americans and large corporations are being properly audited while the IRS workforce is shrinking.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you. I'm told that Administrator Bisignano is not going to answer any questions related to the Social Security Administration while he's here before this committee. That doesn't seem like a great rule. I don't know if the chair has approved that refusal to answer questions on that subject.
Well, this is an IRS hearing, not a Social Security hearing.
And does that mean that we don't get to ask questions about Social Security Administration?
Oh, you can ask whatever questions you want. I leave it up to the CEO as to what he will answer.
Will you answer?
If you want to ask me a question,
No question.
I'm sorry?
That is a yes or no question. Will you answer?
I want to hear the question. I'll answer. I'll definitely answer.
Okay, good.
I'll definitely answer.
It's pretty simple. You and I have talked before about this subject, and that is protecting the data of the Social Security Administration. When we first spoke and we had the hearing here, you said you'd do a complete review of the extent to which what I call the doggy boys had gone in and exfiltrated data from the Social Security Administration. And you then reported back that it looked like there had been no problem, that the data was sound. Since then, there have been multiple reports of doggy boy people having removed potentially significant amounts of data from the death list and others and exfiltrated them when they left to provide as an asset to private sector employers and so forth. Would you like to update us on what your review has shown?
Yeah, that review's been fully put in front of the ranking member and the chairman's staff and been reviewed with them.
And what can you assure us about what Social Security data has been exfiltrated?
We've been very clear about we don't see any data that left the House.
You don't see any data that left the House?
Oh,
okay. The number of new exams, audits for taxpayers in very, very, very high income categories, like above $10 million in income, has dropped by 9%, and I believe it's scheduled to drop by another 30%. I go back to the days when the majority of the IRS's enforcement effort was in states like Mississippi, going after the poorest people. And I thought that one of the good things that we did on a bipartisan basis was to refocus the IRS audit on the people who are most likely to be tax cheats, which is people who have enormous resources and the ability to deploy complex tax cheat strategies. What is up with the reduction in interest in auditing very rich people and the reduction in actual audits of very rich people?
Well, there's, first of all, this year, collections and enforcement is up 12%, and this is year to date. As I said earlier, we've had over $2 billion in the top 5 audits that we collected on. And we'll go after every bad actor. There's no bias to any of it. It's every bad actor. You're not going to have the type of revenue we have coming in from enforcement if you're not collecting from highly compensated people and bad actors. So, I mean, I think that this year's numbers will prove itself out.
So what explains that, for instance, the large business and international division lost 19% of its staff? And has that affected audits in the large business and international
No,
division?
I think what our head of enforcement would say and our head of CI would say is their ability to use technology has completely gotten them reaching out to more, not less. I don't think that the metric anyone ever had that said it was the right number of staff, and I'm going to always ensure that we have the right number of staff to get every job done we need.
Mr. Chairman, I think it might behoove the committee to have a kind of technical session on looking at how the IRS is implementing new AI and data systems in order to overcome what seems to be very dramatic reductions in workforce dedicated to audit. I hear the point that the administrator is making, but I think it would be helpful if we sat down at some point with some of the folks from the IRS to have it explained to us how that's actually playing out in practice. Because if what is happening is that less resources are being sent to large businesses, large corporations, international schemes, and super high-end individuals for audit, then the results are kind of predictable. They'll get off scot-free the way they often
I
did
think
in
your
the past.
suggestion of getting that information is very good. Now, whether that means we'd have another session and have a committee meeting on it, or whether we get the data and get the information.
Yeah, either way, I think would just be a useful thing for us to do as AI enters the IRS enforcement landscape.
I've seen a lot of information that gives answers to that, so I think we can get that
I
information.
think that'd be very helpful. I appreciate it, Chairman. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Administrator.
Thank you.
Senator,
Now let me say this right away. This hearing perfectly exposes the growing divide in Washington between politicians who want more government power and Americans who are tired of watching bloated federal agencies fail over and over again while demanding more money and more control. One of the first things that stood out was the back and forth over Social Security Administration data. Senator Whitehouse immediately tried to frame the conversation around alleged doggy boy operatives supposedly accessing or exfiltrating data from Social Security systems. And this is where I think conservatives need to pay close attention. Protecting Americans' personal data absolutely matters. Nobody wants sensitive information mishandled. But what we keep seeing from the political establishment is selective outrage, depending on who controls the bureaucracy. When massive government agencies lose track of taxpayer dollars, expose personal information, or fail basic oversight under establishment leadership, suddenly we're told not to panic. But the moment outsiders start reviewing these agencies or try to modernize them, suddenly Washington acts like democracy itself is collapsing. The administrator responded clearly that their review found no evidence that Social Security data had actually left the House. That's important because accusations without evidence have become a major problem in modern politics. Too many politicians throw around dramatic language, hoping the headlines will do the damage before facts are ever confirmed. And honestly, this is exactly why trust in government keeps collapsing. Americans are exhausted by constant fear campaigns. Every hearing turns into another political performance where one side predicts catastrophe while the other side scrambles to defend itself from accusations that often sound bigger than the actual evidence being presented. Then the hearing shifted toward IRS audits and enforcement against wealthy taxpayers. Whitehouse argued that audits of Americans making over $10 million had dropped and warned that rich individuals and corporations could get off scot-free. Now here's where I think the conservative perspective is critical. Nobody supports tax fraud. If somebody is breaking the law, They should be investigated. But what Americans don't trust is the idea that giving the IRS more power somehow magically creates fairness. The IRS has a long history of targeting ordinary Americans, small business owners, conservatives, and working families, while politically connected elites often walk away untouched. And let's be honest about something else. Washington politicians love pretending the solution to every problem is hiring more bureaucrats, more agents, more departments, more surveillance, more spending. Meanwhile, the national debt explodes, government inefficiency grows, and Americans get squeezed harder every year. What I found interesting was the administrator pushing back by saying enforcement collections were actually up 12% and that the IRS had already collected billions from major audits. That completely undercuts the narrative that enforcement has somehow disappeared. But then comes the part that should really concern every American: AI inside the IRS. The hearing ended with discussion about how artificial intelligence and data systems are supposedly helping compensate for reduced staffing levels. Now listen carefully, because this is bigger than taxes. This is about the federal government rapidly expanding the use of AI to monitor, analyze, and potentially target financial activity on a scale we have never seen before. And here's the problem. Washington always promises technology will make government more efficient, but somehow it always seems to result in more surveillance, more data collection, and less privacy for ordinary citizens. Conservatives have been warning about this for years. You combine massive federal databases, artificial intelligence, financial monitoring systems, and politically weaponized agencies, and you create the perfect environment for abuse if the wrong people gain control. That doesn't mean technology itself is evil. AI can absolutely improve efficiency. It can reduce waste. It can identify fraud faster. But Americans should never blindly trust unelected bureaucracies with unlimited technological power and zero accountability. And notice something else during this hearing. They kept talking about workforce reductions as if fewer bureaucrats automatically means disaster. But many Americans actually believe the federal government is too large already. The average working American has to do more with less every single year. Businesses streamline operations constantly. Families tighten budgets constantly. Yet Washington acts like every agency deserves endless expansion forever. That mindset is exactly why people are frustrated. I also think this hearing exposed the difference between how conservatives and progressives fundamentally see government. Progressives tend to believe large, centralized agencies are the solution to most national problems. Conservatives tend to believe concentrated power becomes dangerous unless it is tightly controlled, transparent, and limited. And history honestly supports conservative skepticism. We've seen government agencies abuse surveillance powers before. We've seen politically motivated investigations before. We've seen selective enforcement before. So when politicians casually talk about AI-driven enforcement systems inside agencies like the IRS, Americans have every right to ask hard questions. Another thing that stood out was how quickly the discussion moved from data security concerns to demands for more aggressive audits on wealthy Americans and corporations. That reveals the broader political goal here. For many on the left, the IRS is not just a tax collection agency anymore. They increasingly view it as a political tool for economic enforcement and redistribution. And again, nobody supports cheating the system. But conservatives understand that once government agencies gain massive new powers, those powers rarely stay limited to their original purpose. Today, it's going after tax cheats. Tomorrow, it becomes expanded financial surveillance. Then eventually it becomes political targeting disguised as enforcement. That's why oversight matters. That's why transparency matters. And that's why Americans should care deeply anytime government agencies start combining artificial intelligence, financial monitoring, and centralized databases. Because freedom is not lost overnight. It's lost piece by piece while politicians promise it's all for your own good. At the same time, Republicans and conservatives also need to stay serious and credible when discussing these issues. We can't just dismiss every concern outright. Data security absolutely matters. Government accountability absolutely matters. If taxpayer information is ever mishandled, Americans deserve the truth immediately. But what Americans are really demanding right now is balance. They want protection from fraud without living under a surveillance state. They want efficient government without unchecked bureaucratic power. They want fairness without political weaponization. And frankly, Washington has not earned the public's trust. This hearing was another reminder that the federal government is rapidly entering a new era where AI, automation, and massive data systems will shape enforcement and oversight in ways most Americans still don't fully understand. That's why these hearings matter. That's why transparency matters. And that's why channels like Freedom Forge exist, to cut through the political theater and actually talk about what these policies could mean for everyday Americans. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Freedom Forge, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do you trust the IRS using AI-powered enforcement systems? Do you think Washington can be trusted with Americans' financial and personal data? Or do you think this is another example of government power expanding too far? Let me know in the comments. And as always, stay informed, stay alert, and keep fighting for freedom.